Today, I would like to introduce you Kyira Wackett, an artist, public speaker, therapist, and community advocate. With a master's degree in counseling psychology, her mission is to use her education and experiences to inspire and empower people to express themselves freely, take the next steps in their journey to self-discovery, and celebrate their inherent worth. She specializes in eating disorders, body image, and self-esteem work, and infuses her own experiences and lessons learned in all that she does as a way to join with her audience and remind them, even at different points of the process, we are all on this journey together. I'm so excited to have her here today. Please join me in welcoming Kyira.
Hi, everyone. So for those of you that are streaming and potentially where I am now located, which is Portland, Oregon, I came into Madison yesterday and found out there was a snow advisory, which is likely what is also stopping some of the people that were going to be here in person today, and realized that I haven't driven in snow in 2 years. And now I understand that anxiety that I think most people have in the first snow of the year, because I woke up this morning and it took me, I think, an hour of mental preparation to get in the car for what proved to be a completely normal drive, so it was very unnecessary. And I now realize that I don't live in Wisconsin anymore, and that was very real today. So what we're going to be doing, and my point in this workshop, typically a lot of the workshops that I offer, we're doing a lot of interactive pieces and I'm talking at you the whole time. Today, our focus is really going to be on me giving you a little bit of background, some context of why what we're doing is important, and then we're going to spend the bulk of the time doing one of the resources or handouts. And for those of you that are live streaming, you would have gotten this in your email. It's your assessing your resource investments. It might be labeled something a little different, and you'll find which one it is. So with that being said, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of these pieces. Just make sure you have that handout available, because that's what we're going to be spending the second half of the day working on together. So what I'm going to have us do first, and if you are live streaming, if you are next to somebody, go ahead and talk to that person. If you're by yourself, just take a few minutes and just journal a little bit about this. I'll have the three of you partner up and talk as a group in here as well. It's to talk about one thing that you want to get out of this workshop, one of the reasons why you are here or why you're drawn to this topic, and then also what makes this topic really uncomfortable. So as we really think about our energy investments, our time investments, the life that we want to lead. This is a topic that people tend to do a lot of buying or purchasing of products, or they want quick fix answers, and it's really uncomfortable to do the actual work. So I'm going to have us just spend about 2 or 3 minutes going over these questions, sharing with partners, or again, taking some time if you are online to just reflect on a sheet of paper. And we'll come back in about 2 minutes and just talk through some of what came up for those of you in the room. So what I'll have us do is come back as a group. For those of you that are online, just take a moment to think about what came up for you. It sounded like a lot of the pieces in this room that are coming up have to do with really maybe knowing what we want, or thinking about the life we want to cultivate and wanting the resources, or sometimes even that internal or external permission on how to make that happen. And so for those of you that are in the room, tell me a little bit more about what makes some of this so difficult. Because all of you are, I'm overhearing you're identifying, you kind of know where you want to go, or you've tried these pieces, or you're aware of what's going on, and it's really difficult to make that transition or make things happen. What do you think gets in the way? The shoulds, the supposed tos, the external pressures. And is that more from kind of an overarching culture or society, or is it people that are more specific and close in your life, or a mixture of all of those things? So internalized shoulds. Absolutely. So shifting the conversation from, which I think many of us can relate to, this conversation around basically we've created dynamics for the people around us where they expect certain things. And now we want to shift that. I like to use, if I had a whiteboard, I'd put it up, but if you imagine relationships in our lives, we both come from here, we're both putting in energy, and we have those arrows of investment. And so the ideal is that your overall or your general average is about 50-50. But we know that those relationships, sometimes we give 80 and they give 20 or vice versa. So it sounds like what you're realizing is I've given a lot and I've set clear expectations that they can almost always count on an average of maybe 70 or 80. Now, how do we scale that back and then also adjust to their distress as well as your distress when the expectations are changing? Absolutely.
In addition to these external constraints, I think once you start to reevaluate whether or not I want to conform to these, then you have like internal questions about, well, what do I actually want to do, or what could I do if I could do anything? And those questions are sometimes more difficult than realizing that you want to change.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you want to change to?
Yeah. Well, and I think especially this idea of change, if we have a pathway where even if it's sort of the predictable pathway that we exist on, if we are then changing to something new, our brain is programmed to avoid ambiguity. And so you're opening the door to possibility, which is synonymous with ambiguity. So our brain goes, oh, we could just stay here. Maybe we're okay with this, because the knowns are sometimes easier than the unknowns. So the big questions become really overwhelming. So what I want us to think about then is what's ultimately happening. So as a cultural phenomenon, and this is not just taking place in the US, but as a whole, this idea of how we're investing our resources, which we'll talk about this more when we go through the handout. I specifically identify that as being our time, our money, and our energy. And energy you can break down into mental, emotional, spiritual, any element of your energy that is being spent on the things that are important or matter, or that you are putting that into that maybe isn't important or valuable. But again, like you said, Patty, the shoulds come up and it makes you feel like they should be important. So this idea, this structure, this conveyor belts that many of us exist in basically has left all of us feeling like the toy that has been used so much that it's ratty, it's dirty, we're falling apart, we're just trying to keep things together, we have these connections. We realize that people, and I think, Emily, kind of what you said about these expectations now that you have set, but also that other people have of us and for us, it is leaving us to the point where we are constantly in a state of exhaustion. And I like to always think about it, and I don't know why my visual, it's like my brain can only go to the Gringotts Bank and Harry Potter, but banks are banks, so you could imagine any bank you want to. But if you imagine going into your resource bucket, if you opened up your bank and you had all of these coins of investment, it's realizing at this point that we're running on empty or running on very low reserves, but this, I guess, adrenaline and the feedback loop and all of the pieces that feed us to feel like we have to keep doing this, and the underlying fear and shame really is consuming us and takes over. So what I like us to think about from this standpoint is how we got here, or why are we here, is because we exist in a culture where the pressures are insurmountable, where as soon as you are born, the expectation is that you are going to already have answers of what you're doing in life, and changing those answers, particularly as we age, becomes harder and harder to do because the cultural sensitivity towards, or the awareness or acceptance of change, tends to dwindle. So then the shoulds and the supposed tos just become the narrative. So what's really important is for us to think about what is happening and why this is really key. And so what we're going to do is walk through a little dynamic around what happens to our brain and how this builds up over time. The ultimate piece I want you to take away from this is that it has to do with having a low sense of self and our self-esteem being low. Very specifically, your self-esteem is your cognitive or your thought-based response around yourself. It is different than how we feel about ourselves. So our emotions, or that emotional place, can be different. It's really what we're thinking and how we talk to ourselves every single day. So at the root of what we're going to walk through, if all of it feels like I'm going through and expanding on something that's way too big, the goal of what you're seeing is that everything that happens leads us to this element of feeling stuck. We're in this state of perpetual motion, feeling like we can't get out of exactly what we're in, or that, again, this idea of if we even open the door to explore something could be different, we're going to be overwhelmed or drowned in that ambiguity or the pressure. So as I started to allude to, this mostly comes up for us as children, and then it continues to advance for us into adulthood. So we'll walk through a series of these, basically what I see happening. So the initial part of what happens is that we have what's called our core beliefs about ourselves and the place that we hold in this world. Our core beliefs are essentially whether or not we feel like we are inherently worthy and lovable or good enough to exist in the state that we are in. So I've said this before, I know many of you might have heard me use this, but basically thinking that about 0.012% of the population, which is obviously very accurate science, has a positive core belief that says, just by being born, I am worthy and lovable. I have yet to actually meet a person that believes that. All of us tend to have a belief on the other side that I am not inherently lovable or worthy unless ... So as we start to develop these beliefs about ourselves, it's this feeling that I have to do something or be something or add something more to who I am in order to be worthy or lovable. But this part is really hard because what happens is the more that I feel this way, the more I need to protect others from seeing this. The reason is at our core, we need to be connected and to feel like we belong. So if we feel like we are not worthy or lovable, and then suddenly we feel like people are going to notice that, our brain is programmed to do whatever it can to protect anybody else from finding that out. So what happens is we build a shell or a layer around this that we start to come up with rules and assumptions about all the ways that we can counteract this reality about who we are. So it's, okay, I am unlovable, I'm unworthy, unless I do this, this, and this. This is where things like how we look, how we dress, how we talk to other people, the jobs that we take, the people that we partner with, the ways even that we dress kids or act around our kids or raise them. All of these influences come from rules and assumptions based on the different roles I have and what I'm expecting that I should be doing in those roles. So what starts to happen with this and where this becomes problematic, and again, we'll notice this as we go through this worksheet, is that the more rules and assumptions that I have, the more that they play into things usually working out when I enact those rules and assumptions. So for example, having had an eating disorder in my life, I exist in a culture where people in smaller bodies, particularly people who present white and are in smaller bodies, are treated differently than people who are in larger bodies. And so when I had rules and assumptions that contributed to a very tumultuous journey through this mental health battle, but the outcome was, well, if I keep following these rules and assumptions, I got more attention in maybe personal ways, but also doors opened, opportunities were there, people treated me differently based on those outcomes. My brain solidifies that and goes even more, okay, then we have to keep doing that, because if we don't, now there's a chance that something bad would happen. You also can kind of see this if you're having a hard time going there in your brain. If you've ever been in a grocery store and there's been a screaming toddler, and that toddler just wants, I don't know, a cereal, or what kinds of things do toddlers usually want? Candy. So they found the candy aisle, or they're in the checkout aisle and they spotted it. And that's all they want, and now they're screaming and screaming and screaming. We all know, and particularly if you're a parent, you know that it's a really hard line to keep drawing, because you feel this pressure from everybody around you to not be inconveniencing everyone. So it's, should I just give them the candy? I just need to silence them. I need to do this because I have all this pressure. But we know as soon as we give them the candy, we've hardwired in their brain that they're going to get what they want as long as they scream. So it's this really interesting piece. And so for all of us, it's that same thing. Internally, we might know this doesn't really work for me. I don't want to do this. I don't love this person or like this job or have these things that feel like they're really adding value to my life. But we feel this external pressure that we have to confine to whatever those rigid rules are or structures are, because again, all of this comes from a very external place of pressure. So over time, what happens is now this is going to just build up more and more, and it becomes what's called our rigid self schema, or our sense of self. So again, this idea of how we see ourselves and we view ourselves in the world. Well, if the way that we've been carrying ourselves in the world overall is that we're performing based on all these rules and assumptions, because we believe if we don't, then we will be seen or found out as being unworthy or unlovable, then we're going to start to develop this self-schema that's basically like putting on a mask every single day. I almost imagine it like those, the onesies, but the ones that are like a elastic like or plastic, and people put them on for, I don't know why they were fun for a period of time, I'm sure they still are. And people would put them on, and it's like a suit that everybody puts on every day, and it's, you know, all green or whatever. It's almost like you're doing that, but if you imagine the print on the suit that you're putting on is all the negative self-talk, all of the shoulds, all of those external reinforcers, and you put it on every day because you feel like you have to, and because you at least know how to exist within that. What starts to happen then over time is, and you'll start to see this, I really feel like I need to go back to and learn earth sciences because I don't really know how the pressure works in building earthquakes and volcanoes, but I imagine that it's as simple as my brain has told me it is that if you think about all of these pieces that are happening underneath, if we call it your earth surface or your core, over time, you're gonna run into times or instances where you can't live up to it. There are moments where I feel like I've set, and I do the same thing, where I set expectations with other people and then I can't live up to them. I had this happen even with my business a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, where I was so overwhelmed with things I had going on that I didn't have time to really write an email the way that I wanted to send out to my email listserv. But the expectation that I had set is you're going to get this great content every single week, brand new, fresh content. It's going to help you in your life to really develop the ways that you want to. And when I couldn't deliver on that, all of the pressure started to surmount in a huge way, that what started to happen is it erupted with thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of failure, of fear, of negative self-talk. And then it really got in my way of even being able to just check in with, what would be the worst that would happen if I didn't do this? Right? What would be the problem if I just said, hey, this week I didn't have a chance to write an email? And so part of it is even thinking about, if all this pressure underneath comes up, we can't live up to every rule and expectation all the time. It's not feasible. It's the same as knowing, as you're watching kids or you're raising kids or doing anything where we watch how kids' brains work, there's going to be a time where they're going to mess up the same way that we as adults do. But this expectation of perfection and performance and perfecting a performance over our life has led us to feel like if everything's not perfect, as soon as we start to drop, as soon as that performance starts to fade, then the pressure erupts, and that's where things like anxiety, overwhelm, frustration, fear, all of that comes into play. So what you'll notice as we go through this and we start to think about our resource investments and how we're investing our time, money, and energy is likely most of those are coming, I don't know why it's not showing up on the screen, most of these will come from the rules and assumptions, and kind of like Patty, what you alluded to about the shoulds of how we should or are supposed to act in the world. And if this pressure is building over and over again, it's going to guide us to feeling like this is the stuff we have to spend our money on. So what ends up happening is that all of this leads to shame, fear, distorted thinking, and negative self-talk. We spoke a little bit about the bottom two, thinking about how our brain starts to shift to the way we view the world. What I notice more so for people that I work with, and even just internally, is from a distorted thinking standpoint, my brain becomes very focused on the all or nothing. The rule or I failed. I have to be perfect or I'm not anything. If everybody doesn't like me, then nobody likes me. And so what you'll notice underneath though is both those bottom two are really about our cognitions. The shame and fear are the emotions that reinforce the cognitions every day. So for those of you that have not read any Brené Brown materials, I highly suggest that you look up any of her TED Talks or her Netflix special or the 7,422 books I feel like she has written at this point. Shame is basically the threat to human connection. It's the belief that when I said we protect that core belief on the back end, it's the belief that someone's going to see that. They're going to see that vulnerable center. And shame tells us, again, that if that happens, we're not going to be worthy of love and connection, so we have to protect it at all costs. So what happens over time is the more pressure we feel to maintain that performance, and the more we feel like we can't, the more shame shows up and says, see, you were never going to be good enough, and it adds more layers to performance and pressure. And the fear-based response is actually, it's interesting, shame enacts the same response in our old brain as fear does. So if anyone's heard of fight, flight, or freeze before, what essentially happens is that whenever we feel fear, so for example, when I was a little kid and I thought that the deep end of the pool had sharks in it because I thought dark water had sharks, that my brain, as soon as I saw dark water, would immediately assume there was a shark and go to fight, flight, or freeze, which was usually flight because I didn't think I could take a shark and I was underwater and so I couldn't freeze. But in our brain, when that happens with our everyday life, the fight, flight, or freeze response is also triggered when we feel shame. And what happens is a cascade in our brain that basically dumps all these stress hormones and chemicals, and I just think of them as poison, into our body that quite literally stops you or paralyzes you from being able to do the things you want to do. That can still show up in the fight, flight, or freeze responses, but if I know that I really want to dare to quit my job and start a brand new business, or if I want to leave my relationship of 40 years because it's no longer serving me and I don't feel happy and I don't feel loved every single day, I'm going to immediately, when the thought comes in, have that dumping of that cascade of all of those poisonous chemicals and cortisol and all of that into my body, and my brain is going to pick fight, flight, or freeze to keep me stuck in whatever that feedback loop is, rather than open the door to the other side for me to start engaging or enacting any type of change. So one of the things I think is really important, and this is rooted more in cognitive behavioral therapy, you'll find this talked about across the road, is that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are really all interconnected. So this is where I have a lot of problem with, again, people wanting just a quick fix or a solution to, I want to be happier, or I want to feel better about this, or I want to be more productive. A lot of times what people are looking for are behavioral changes or answers to how we just enact this 5-step system and everything is going to be great. And it works because there are a lot of people that have become really famous and make a lot of money selling you on, here's the next Band-Aid that you can put on your gaping wound. And so if we look at this piece here, the behaviors are key. We have to talk about how to change our behaviors and behavior modification. But you'll notice in the double arrows going back and forth to all of these pieces, if I just change the behaviors, but my thoughts and my feelings are still completely distorted and negative, and I have a low sense of self-worth, and my feelings are still riddled in shame and fear, it's inevitable that I'm only going to see short-term change in my behaviors, because the other two are eventually going to collude back and lead my behaviors to making those choices that are safe, or investing in those resources or those different things that I don't maybe care as much about, but I feel like I have to in order to maintain whatever that pressure is from the thoughts and the feelings. So when we go through some of this work today, we're going to talk a little bit about how we're going to start to bring awareness and draw more awareness to the thoughts piece and start to bring some insight into the feelings and behaviors. Most of what I'm giving you is homework today. Because again, I can't promise you a Band-Aid. I can't promise you that in an hour you're going to have done the work to fix what has taken decades to build up in your brain and has become your narrative. You have the power to do that. I'm simply going to give you the next steps and the tools to do it. So you'll also notice, either in person or if you are live streaming, you got several other handouts that we're going to walk through on how all of these connect. What I'm basically going to challenge you to do is to set aside an hour every week, every 2 weeks, however you want to do it, but to build some momentum and use some of these different resources so that we can start to address all 3 of these pieces and start to build momentum in a way that you're noticing almost a spiral change across all 3 of them that is going to start to trend upwards versus assuming that we need to have this immediate vertical jump in our outcomes. The other thing that I want us to think about as we start to go through this first worksheet together is that what also ends up happening is the more that we're performing, the more we over. I'll explain what I mean by that. Essentially, we overspend, overextend, overperform, and overinvest. So as you are thinking about all of the things that go on in your life, I can go back, and I like to use middle school and high school as an example because almost everybody will have gone through at least middle school at this point, is that we overspend our time maybe or our money. Like I was in high school and middle school during the time of Hollister polo shirts, which were not great, we'll say. They were maybe poorly made or not the greatest quality shirt. We'll just say that. They're a company based in fast fashion. But the, I guess, style was that you would buy like 30 of these polo shirts and you would alternate them every single day, wearing multiple polo shirts layered, and you would pop part of your collar. It was so interesting looking back on it. So I worked 2 jobs in high school, and I would spend all of my money on trying to buy these stupid shirts that did not fit my body type. I didn't like them. They weren't comfortable. They were tight in spots that they shouldn't be and loose in spots that they shouldn't be. And then I would also spend money on the Abercrombie jeans that everybody thought you had to have, which were basically like shorts that came up to partway through your thighs. And so you had all these gaps in your body. It just was not great. But the overspending was, if I spend my money on these things, if I dress the part and look the part, then maybe I'll fit in and be okay. So we overspend. Now, as adults, we might do that on going out and feeling the need to overinvest in going out for drinks or getting coffee with people we don't actually care to get coffee with. If you were to ask yourself how many times you say yes and spend money and time on people that you really don't care about or don't really want to say yes to, my guess is it's quite a bit. So it's even thinking about, do I overspend my time, my money, my resources on things that I'm saying yes when I want to say no? The overextending piece usually comes from the narrative then that not only do we have to maintain what we've done in the past or keep up with those expectations that we've set, but also thinking that it's never a trade-off, that I can never give myself permission to say, well, this new thing was added, so these other things shift, rather than saying I'm going to move my investments around or set up my portfolio in a different way. We just assume we have to add one more to the pile. The overperforming piece, again, comes from that overcompensation, that suit that you're putting on every single day. And so the more that I feel a threat to it or that I'm not living up to that performance or delivering my best performance, the more I'm going to try to overdo it and over-exist inside of that. So for me, because my go-to when I feel shame is to really try to be the subservient one that can do everything for everyone, I will immediately, when I start to feel like I'm not doing a good enough job, take on even more of a role, and I will overperform in trying to be that person. And now I'm not just going to be the person that can handle things for you and I can add value. I'm going to be the best person in your life that can do that. I'm going to be the one that you have to turn to first because you'd have no other option because I blow everybody else out of the water. Right? So it's, again, thinking this feeling like we have to overdo it. Oh, I felt like I wasn't being a good mom. Right now, then I'm going to be the best mom in the world. I'm going to overextend myself in every way and perform and be that person. And then the last one, as we think about overinvesting, is similar to when we talk about overspending. It's essentially thinking about the long-term investments and the short-term investments that we're making in the people, places, and things that really don't add value or bring us any return in our life. So if you were working with a financial manager and you had a stock portfolio and you kept investing in a stock that was losing you money all the time, they would probably tell you to pull your money out of that stock. When it comes to how we're spending our time, our money, and our energy every day, we don't have somebody coming up to us saying we're over-investing or that stock is not working for us. So again, it's thinking, how much am I investing? Either because I feel like I have to or because I keep thinking there's the promise that things could change and be better. So it's also that holding out that, oh, well, maybe it could be better. I have a fantasy of what life could be, and so I hold out hope for something that in reality it's not performing. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through and talk a little bit about how we can start to clarify our investments. One of the things that's key, and I guess kind of alluded to on the slide that I just went past, is that we really need to look at this feedback loop of our thoughts and behaviors. I can already tell you fear and shame are going to be some of the highest feelings that you're going to have. They're going to show up on both sides. So our goal today is to look a little bit more at how those thoughts and behaviors are feedbacking into each other and how they're creating some of those cycles in our brain that we're going to continue to feel this pressure and over time a habituation to just keep existing in what we're doing. So what I'm going to have you do is grab the Assessing Your Resource Investments handout, and this is the one that we're going to start working through. So what I will do is walk you through, we'll do each step one at a time and come back and do a little discussion. If you're live streaming, you're going to go ahead and do those same sections with me, and then as we are pausing and just reflecting, spending some time to talk with the people in the room here, you might hear something that you haven't thought about, or be able to even just do a little bit more of that internal work and reflection as we're going through this. So what I'm going to have us do is starting with section 1. So the whole goal of this handout is essentially, and I use sand buckets to think about how I always get this image, again, being a very visual person, of kids out on the beach On the beach by the ocean would be the proper grammar use for that sentence, yes. And so thinking about building all these sandcastles, they just keep building their buckets, and they love making more and more of the little castle pieces. This is what we're doing, we're just realizing it's not so helpful. So what I'm gonna have us do as we go through this first part is we're essentially gonna start to do a, what are we currently doing and what do we wanna be doing with our investments? So step one, I'm gonna have you all look at page 1 and go through this first step where each bucket on here, and if you need more space, I gave you 12. If you need more space, grab another sheet of paper, or if you printed it, you can just use, well, you can't use the back because this one's double-sided. So you can use a different sheet of paper, whatever you wanna do, is to start making a name under each one of these buckets for all the things that you spend your time on. So it might be family, friends, job. When I go through these, sometimes I break them up a little bit more. So I've put, when I've done this before, Jordan, my husband, my mom, my family in-laws, my in-laws, I guess is what you would say. So my immediate family over there. With friends, it might be my friends that are in Portland with me, friends that are not near me. I like to get a little bit more specific because that's how my brain works with the investments. So you can start however general or specific you want to. So go ahead, we'll take about 2 minutes to go through and do that and just get a start on it, and then we'll come back as a group. If you're getting stuck too, sometimes what's helpful is to think how you spend time every day or the places that you go, some of the different roles that you have. It might not just necessarily be people. You can also, if you are, especially if you're live streaming, you can pull up your calendar and look at the past month or the past few months and just see a little bit about where your time is going. And remember, because I put 12 buckets does not mean that all 12 buckets have to be filled and or that there's not more than 12 buckets. This is just what looked nice on the paper, being honest. For those of you in the room, tell me some of the buckets that are coming up for you. What are you seeing? Yes, we absolutely can. Do you want to start with it or do you want to wait?
Things like at home, cooking, cleaning, doing paperwork, emails, responding to emails, paying for bills, walking the dog, exercising, volunteering, helping another family out.
You have partnership on there?
No.
You have your sons on there?
No.
Okay, let's add those buckets too.
Okay.
Let's think about family buckets or the grandma bucket, right?
Yeah.
And what does that mean? And even distance in grandma bucket. Think about that. What are some ones you have?
Admin work, driving, supporting the team at work, networking, phone calls, social media. Matt, Ellie, Hannah, my parents, sleep, cleaning. Feels like never ends.
Yeah. Which again, like some of these buckets are basically, so if you haven't heard the Eckhart Tolle quote, it's, I'm going to flop it a little bit, but basically saying that everything we do in life should be done for one of 3 reasons. Because I'm going to butcher it. Acceptance, enjoyment, and enthusiasm. And so there are certain buckets, right, like the cleaning bucket that feels like it's never ending. We just accept that that's part of everyday life. Some people really love it, but not everybody. So it's also thinking about what is it with some of those buckets that are never ending? Do we accept it or have enjoyment or enthusiasm that those buckets are just always going to be there as well? Okay, what were some of the other ones that came up for you?
I split work into like creative work, but then like dumb stuff you have to do at your like job.
Yeah.
Like, answer emails and stuff.
It's the mundane, everyday, I can't not do them tasks.
Right.
But then there's also the other part that
when you're like being productive or like doing stuff you
actually
like
want to
making
do.
Different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like part of work is just showing up. Part of it's like doing something.
Yeah.
So I put those in different ones.
That's completely, I think that's really important.
But yeah, then it's just like spouse, kids, exercise, music. I like to play music. And then like, yeah, family stuff. So
what's interesting I'll let the three of you read what's right underneath those buckets. Did anybody cheat and read that yet? Okay, read the little blurb that's right underneath those buckets. None of you have it, and those of you that are doing this live or are going to be watching the recording later, I want you to go ahead and read that bucket, or that little point, and I want you to add the two buckets if you have not put them on there already, which I will tell you are self-care and negative self-talk. So what I like us to think about is some of what you all are getting at would probably fall into a bucket of self-care if we were extending it, right? Spending time with people that you love and you enjoy, if it's friends, if it's family, your kids, if there are certain parts of your life, your hobbies, playing music that feel really important to you. What's really key is that we have to call out a separate bucket for self-care, because how we label it in our brain and how we think about and talk about our investments becomes really key to how our brain dumps chemicals and actually has physiological responses to how we're spending our time. So even if I am listening to music just because I'm in the car, or I'm listening to music as part of my self-care, if I'm just in the car listening to music and my brain is labeled as just passing time or making the ride more enjoyable, I will have a different neurochemical response than if I sit down and I'm being very intentional and saying this is my self-care time and I'm going to spend some time listening to and really engaging with music. So what I also think is interesting is hearing how each of you broke down some of those different pieces. So thinking more about the job, thinking more about how we break down the job in a way that can factor in the different elements of how our brain is investing, because your time is still an investment when you're at work, but the energy you're investing is very different in both of those. Similarly, when we talk about our money or our finances, I mean, you have two separate buckets of kids, right? And so you would probably see that it's probably just one big bucket in some way, shape, or form, and just lots of the money resource. And there's this element then of knowing how you had to split your time. Like you can't necessarily just have kids in one bucket, because what your time looks like with each of them is different, particularly if they're different ages. So what we're going to do now is spend just a few minutes going through, and now I want you to imagine that I gave you 100 coins that you could invest in each of these buckets, 100 total. So it's going to be a little bit like you're doing a math problem. You're going to go back into each of those buckets now, and you're going to start to write how much of each of those energy, time, and money coins is going into every one of these pieces. It's your choice if you want to go ahead and do it as 3 separate investments, your time, your money, and energy, because that might look a little different, or you can just start off by doing a general investment and kind of lumping them together. But the total, when you look at all of your buckets, is only going to be 100. So if we're talking about investing, we have that finite amount of resources. So as you go through and you do this, remember to keep your total set up. We don't have an infinite amount of resources. Okay, take about 2 minutes and do that, then we'll come back. And as we're going through this part, since people will be on a slightly different timeline as they're doing this, and particularly if you're doing this live streaming right now, what I'll say is then you can go on to the next question once you've done it. So on that second page, there's a reflection question and some areas for you to do a little bit of thinking. What I'll have you do in the room is as you're going through and completing this, when we all finish, we'll just have a little discussion in person. And for those of you that are doing it online, you can just start that point at any time. As you're doing this, you might notice too that you're going to have some thoughts of not wanting to be honest. Kind of like if anybody ever has done a BuzzFeed quiz, or I used to do like Cosmo Girl quizzes or whatever, you could read the answers and know what your real answer is and what you wanted to answer to get the results that made you feel more like it was the person you wanted to be. So if you notice that pull to not be honest with yourself about how you're spending right now, try to do whatever you can to just acknowledge that it's there, the pressure is there. It's there because your brain really wants to work to have you not see the reality, because if we don't see and face our reality, we don't have the insight to start making changes. And then tell yourself that if we don't get an accurate assessment of where we are now, all we're going to do is just keep putting Band-Aids on everything and keep pretending like things are better than they are or different, and you're not going to be able to apply these different tools and resources as effectively. How'd the math go? Good? Are you hating? Isn't it hard?
Yes.
That's part of the point. So you're having the right reaction. So for those of you that didn't hear, we were saying it's hard to get it just right at that 100 and to stay under 100 because you start going, oh, but I spend a lot of my time and my money and my resources here and I do this and I do this. So you're asking yourself to work within a budget, but you've been telling yourself that you don't have to be working within that budget for a really long time. This is going to be part of what we're going to have some discussion around, because that's where the problem comes into play. So as you're looking at this, and again, if you are with somebody else and you are watching this live or you're watching the recording, talk to somebody else about this right now, or you'll just take some time and fill out the handout and do some self-reflection. So in here, what is coming up for all of you as you look not only at the buckets that you put down, but you started to think about your investments?
Well, for me, it's just generally spending way more of my time on things that I don't really enjoy or want to be doing, and not on the things that are really meaningful.
So, and are they things that you're spending your time on or your energy on that have to be invested in? Like, are they things that are always going to be there? We just can look at maybe we can invest less, or are they things that you're going, maybe I could just take these buckets off altogether?
No, I'm going to have to do all these things, but maybe spend less time or change my expectations on how often I do it, or
Yeah.
do I pick up pizza tonight or make something for dinner, or cleaning less often.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I think comes up quite a bit is, so I can't remember where I was, but we had this conversation around, our time is money. Our time is our energy. Time can be really, if we were talking about the finite resource, it's everything that kind of represents all of the other components that we're talking about investing here. And so if you spend, let's say, 2 hours a day cooking over the course of 3 different meals, or making, if you get a snack or whatever, you spend 2 hours of your day doing that every day. That's 14 hours a week that you're spending, and now it's 56 hours a month. And I don't know how much that is times 12, but a lot. Probably 600 hours almost a month of doing, or a year of doing that work. And it's 600 hours that you're not happy and you're not feeling fulfilled and you hate it and you're just drudging through. Part of it then is to think, then how much of that is me telling myself that I should be doing this, or I'm supposed to be doing that? And am I investing all of that time and that energy because I think that's the smarter financial decision, or because it's what I need to be doing, or, and this would be something we would talk about more, is even thinking how much do our intersecting identities and the roles that we have, right? Is it if I'm born and socialized female, if I'm in a different dynamic, what is that responsibility I take on? The follow-up question then is to think, it would take me 2 hours a day to do all that work. Or the example I think about is cleaning, because I hate every bit of it, is I love the organizing part, but I want someone to do the gross work, right? All the actual cleaning, I just want to make it look good at the end. If I spend, let's say, 4 hours a week doing that, and that's 4 hours of my time that I can't spend in my business or with my partner or going out and doing something I want to do, maybe I'm saving money, but is the time investment worth it? If it takes that much for me in an energy perspective. So from cooking or cleaning, what would it look like to give yourself permission that once a month you bring in a cleaning service? And is that a bigger financial investment than what you're currently spending? But is the time that you get back worth it? Is the energy that you get back worth it? And so part of it is we still have to play around with how it breaks down in those specific investments, and everybody comes with different limitations in terms of their time and their money and all of that, but also thinking about how that comes into play for us too. What came up for you as you were going through this?
I spend a lot of time and energy on work and work-related things.
Yeah.
And a lot of time with my daughters because they demand a lot of time, and I love to give it to them. Some time with my husband. I put more energy in sleep because I need sleep to do all the things I'm doing at work. But that's where things start to break down.
Mm-hmm.
So
noticing for you specifically the amount that is going into this chunk, that there are lots of different pieces into it, but you're noticing that then basically your sleep and why you have to invest in it is just to keep up doing the things that you're realizing you don't really want to be investing in that same way.
Yeah, I was just there was a DreamBank book club this past summer where you tracked your time for like
Yeah.
a month. So I guess the exercise is pretty easy for me because I did that for a while and kind of know how it's getting split up, and I guess I'm in general okay with it. So yeah, I mean, I went through the exercise of okay, cutting things out that
Yep.
don't align with whatever, and actually tracking the hours. But like, just like, is there something more, or is like I'm efficiently dividing my resources among like things that are there in my life? But I mean, like, I'm more interested in like, yeah, kind of like what is it all for kind of
Yeah.
question. So like, yeah, we can divide this and it's
Yes.
efficient and that kind of stuff, but what's beyond that?
Which I didn't pay you to say this, but it's great because you're aligning with the exact next part of what we do is we look at, so it's one thing for us to just do an investment analysis, right? To look at how we spend our time, our money, and our energy, which brings awareness and starts to get the wheels turning and we start to think about it. The second part that a lot of people miss out on then is what's the return on investment? And that's where it comes into play that's more key and gets at more of, well, what's the value component? And I know, Patty, you were saying that in the beginning about having done this values worksheet with me a couple years ago now, I think, and still really having this question of how am I spending my time in things that I value? And so I will go through this with you when it comes to some of the next handouts and what you're going to do for homework. But even specifically, the next step in this is you start to think, well, what is my return on investment? So the next part of it is actually going to each of those buckets and thinking, what do I get out of this and why am I doing it? So for example, if you are, let's say that you actually hate your job and you are good at it, you've efficiently started to think about how to program your time and you can get through what you need to do, but you come home and you're drained, you're not getting anything that's charging you or exciting you, or those moments where you get it are few and far between from the parts that drain you, that becomes more of the important conversation is to say, okay, I can keep doing this, but the first part is really looking at the conveyor belt that we've built. The second part is to think, how is this conveyor belt feeding me or not feeding me in terms of my long-term investment in myself? So similarly, again, if we looked at our investment portfolio, it's looking at, so every investment that I have, what is my return? And I looked at, for me, the more problematic area was one, from a work standpoint, I kept trying to do 9-to-5 jobs or jobs where, because I split my time as a therapist and as a speaker and as an artist, I start to feel this pressure, like in each bucket, even though they'd all be their own separate buckets, it's like they should all be growing faster, so I have to do more. So I was forcing myself to take on more of these things that didn't work for me. So then it was coming back and thinking twofold. One, how many times am I taking jobs that I don't want to take because I feel like I have to? And usually because fear is telling me it's the safer choice, which is what you'll get at as we kind of walk through this. But then the second part is thinking, okay, so it's not just, well, what am I doing and why am I doing it? But even, am I taking the things that actually add value and bring me joy and then over investing in them from these external expectations? So if I only do one art show a year, why is that make me less of an artist or less successful or less talented than the people that do an art show every single weekend? And so I think it's looking at both of those pieces, not just do I even want or get that positive return, but then even how am I investing in them in a way that might actually be draining, and is there a better balance in the investment? The other thing I looked at is when it comes to social engagement. So I had a lot of friends that the more I did this analysis, I realized and this is very true, there was a period of time in my life where my clients, my therapy clients, brought me more joy every week to see them than the friends in my life. That is crap, right? These are people that my job is to be there for them, and that's great, and I want to do that, and that's wonderful that I had clients I was serving, but the people I was choosing in my life were the people that then I didn't want to spend time with. And that seems really unfair to do. So the other part is to look at, in these different relationships, how are these relationships working for and against us? And so if that's your partnership, I think kids are always going to be a somewhat net negative when you think about your general resources, but if we go on a bigger level, right, there's positives and all of that. So, but thinking there are some different relationships that are always going to be that we're giving a little bit more and we have to. There's a lot of choices that we have that we need to consider as well. So this is what I want us to do. I want to talk a little bit about where you go with the rest of this handout and then how this layers with the other handouts that you have. Because again, you're seeing we spent 25 minutes just working on one page in this handout. And if we start to go deeper and start to talk about all of these pieces, it's going to start to come up for you. How your brain is going to access it, though, might not be through this handout or this discussion. So that's why we have other tools, so that hopefully we can kind of come at your brain and your brain patterns from a variety of angles to get them to come out and start doing some of this work. So what you were alluding to is the next part of what you'll do with this handout, where you're going to start to really look at the return on our investments. If I'm investing in X, Y, and Z, what am I getting out of it? And what's my overall average? The other question then that you ask yourself is, do I want to continue to invest in that? You're then going to move into and transition into doing the exact same exercise that we just did in the beginning. But what you're going to do now is create your future-oriented answers. What do you actually want to see your daily life look like? And what's really key with this is to think some of those buckets might still be there. And sometimes I've had people do this where their buckets are the exact same as what they were when they started, but what that looked like, not only in terms of how much of their resources they were giving, but how they showed up was different. A lot of times what comes up, I think, in terms of the biggest changes usually has to do with our hobbies and has to do with our social life and our work. So a lot of that is really giving yourself permission to say, because you're going to feel that pressure to want to just make it everything's fine, is to not just go along with that, to tell yourself it's okay to want something different, and then we're going to address the fear in one of the other handouts. And then there's some reflection pieces that you'll go through with that as well, and just starting to get your brain thinking about all of these different pieces of what are the differences, what do I want, what do I not want, how do I feel when I imagine a life that would be this type of an investment for me. Now again, reminding yourself that this is one step. Our brain, as you remember, it's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. All I'm doing in this first workshop or worksheet is to give you some insight and to do that initial analysis. You're only going to get out of this some general information. What it is and why that's important is without the information, we can't do the work part to get to the other side. So it's doing these pieces, and it sounds like in your case, you've done that first part. Now it's looking at that investment piece. And what I'll have you tie that to is one of the other handouts that we're going to be doing, which is basically looking at our values. So the third one on this list, and all of you have all four of these. Oh, why am I taking yours? I don't know. I have them literally right here. You're going to be exploring your values. What you're going to do with this and how this connects to that first worksheet is to think about, I'm going to get a narrowed list of my top 5 values, or the values that I want to be focusing on. What you're going to go back and look at then is to think how much of what I'm investing my time, my money, and my energy on then feeds into and fills my cup of my values. So with that, everything that we do in some way, it's kind of like a company's mission statement, those 3 or 4 words that they have bolded on their website. You have your 5 words that will be bolded on your brand of who you are, what your values are. So as you look at each of those buckets, again, you might have some things like cleaning that's going to be in your bucket list that isn't necessarily aligning with your values in the same way. But what you're going to notice is all those other buckets that I'm filling, if I say friends, are my friends buckets actually filling those values or detracting from me? The last couple that you're going to do, one is called an inside versus outside reflection. It looks like this, where it has 2 faces on it. What you're doing with this is basically now you're going to be assessing between, you've done this work on your investments, on learning your values. Now we're going to look at how does the performance come into play? Where is the overperformance happening? So then as you're doing this, you're going to look at who am I on the inside? So all the things that are coming out in those first couple of handouts. And then you're going to look at, but who am I pretending to be on the outside? Who am I telling myself I need to be, and where do those shoulds and musts come into play? And then what we're going to be doing is going a layer deeper and thinking, okay, so then how does this play into then creating the life that I want to lead? And then the last 2 that I gave you are determining the real risks and a thought record. What I will say is that determining the real risks, so the order I would go in is assessing your resources, going through the values worksheet, doing the mask activity or that inside versus outside, and then using the determining the real risks factor. What you're looking at here now is all you've done is build the insight and you're moving to action. When you get to action, fear and shame are going to be the thing that stops you. So then you're going to actually start to train your brain to go, what is scaring me? What's overwhelming me? What is the absolute worst thing that could happen? And what will I do to deal with it when it does? Or how likely is it that this is actually going to take place? So if you leave your job, I did this when I took on another full-time job back in February, and I was like, I don't want to do this. I really want to go back into private practice, and I want to do more in my speaking realm. My husband says, then let's do it. Well, the worst that would happen is that I don't get clients for a while. I don't have money coming in for 6 months because insurance companies are interesting, we'll say. And so having all of this going on, I won't have an income for 5 or 6 months. The worst that could happen I didn't have an income for 5 or 6 months. Did that mean it wasn't worth doing it? Absolutely not. So it's looking at what are those worst pieces, and I suppose there's actually way worse things that could have happened. I was in a little bit more of a balanced, realistic answer with that one. But thinking, okay, so then even on a bigger likelihood, it's not likely that then suddenly I'm not going to be able to pay my bills or make things work, or I won't get clients. It's just that I have to train my brain. I don't need everything immediately resolved. And then the last handout that I gave you that can be helpful with this is the thought record. Purely, that is just a tool that I use with every person, whether they're a therapy client, a coaching client, a friend, a family member. What that's looking at is helping you actually then categorize how your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors all play into each other. So it's a tool that you can use alongside of it. I don't necessarily see it progressing in terms of the order. It's really one that I'm just giving you as an extra resource and tool to bring more insight into how all of these things work, so that you can look at why your outcome result of what you're investing in, how you're investing in, or how you're showing up is leading you to collude with a lot of that shame in those narratives. All right, that being said, all of you have my email on most of these handouts. You'll get an email with all the follow-up, and we have the live stream ready and uploaded. I will be putting this on my website. DreamBank will be sharing this as well, and so we'll have all of this information readily available. As you're working through this, it's your job, remember, to do this work, and you have tools and resources, and that includes emailing me and reaching out. So if you are stuck in this next step, it's not just saying, well, we didn't have enough time and now I can't do it and this was a waste of time. It's going, what do I need to take that next step? And how am I going to leverage the tools and resources available to do it? All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you all being here, and I look forward to helping you all in the rest of your journey as you continue through this process.